why do you see like relationships?
Well, I suppose we could talk about that for the entirety of today's class. Any other questions before we wrestle with that one? Why do relationships go bad? That's it?
You think there's good in everyone?
It depends how you want to use them. Anna? Anyone else before we... Okay? You're in a good mood today, huh? Okay. I can give you some perspectives. They'll probably not satisfy you, but we'll give it a shot. Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Anna.
I have another question kind of related to the Adam, Eve, and Lilith video. So you were saying Lilith represents like darkness, but Eve also represents like a different type of darkness. And I know you talk about like a teacher like Socrates or Jesus or someone like that will take you into the darkness of yourself and then push you through it towards growth, like spiritual growth. But when you've talked about it in the past, it seems like the type of darkness you describe Lilith and Eve to be is like kind of to be this same thing. But in that video you said they were like different.
Okay.
Are they different or the same?
Yes, no, follow up.
Please.
Is it because Lilith wants to get on top of Adam and Eve just wants to choose something? She doesn't try to suffocate him. Or,
How's that?
Please, it's like a buffet today. Yeah.
So I feel like Lilith was more of a equal to Adam than Eve was to Adam. I feel like Eve was made to submit to Adam. And I think when God created Lilith, he wanted God, like, well, maybe I need to change the ratio.
Beginning. Okay. Thank you. You have class, no? It's good to see you. Good morning. There are, of course, lots of perspectives out there as to what Lilith is, what Adam is, what the creation story is all about. This is just a drop in this vast ocean of all these interpretations and perspectives. Mine may be completely off, just plain wrong. So What happened to your knee?
I sprained my ACL. That was a while ago.
When you do have children, your kids will want their father to have a healthy set of legs.
Yeah. So I said this. Sorry.
Yeah. Any other questions or topics out there that you?
I thought of another thing.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
It was related to the same. But I guess a way I just thought of interpreting it is like, so Eden represents like a utopia, like ignorant bliss, and then Lilith is like the darkness creeping in. So Adam wants to stay in the bliss, which I guess can be a representation of like numbing your pain in modern day. And Lilith is like trying to creep at him, but then Eve is like the type of darkness where it like pulls you in towards growth instead of just into depression. Like, because she takes them out of Eden, the apple.
So before we talk about all these different stories and questions, let me tell you a story first. And I borrow this from one of my good friends who passed away some about 4,000 years ago, or maybe 3,000, 2,000. Aristophanes, a playwright, a jokester of sorts. So initially, when human beings were created, you had two genders in one body. And they were, of course, created by the chief god of the ancient Greeks, whose name was Zeus. I don't know if any of you in this class, and I'm sure some of you in this class have, but you have fallen in love. And you see yourself in your companion, and I suppose he or she sees herself or themselves in you. Initially, the way things work is that here's your body, here's your mind, and here's your soul. You can replace that with emotions. But because of the busyness of life, the mind thinks what it thinks. Your soul has a different set of desires, and of course, your body has its own things to pursue. So what you have is a human being who is fragmented into 1,001 different pieces. Sometimes what happens, and I suppose all of us in this case are very, very lucky, and let's just say this is me, a mess of a human being, and there is, given that I'm a hetero, this is a young woman, and this is the same scenario. She's also fragmented because of the busyness of life. You come to class, you're interested, then you rush to your math class, you get bored, then you worry about your rent. So nothing about us really is harmonious, within or without. So all of a sudden what happens is this miserable creature looks at this other miserable creature, and all of a sudden there is a sense of attraction. When you spend enough time with anything, whether it's a cat or a mouse or a table or a chair or a sofa or a human being, you have no choice but experience the evolution of feelings into emotions. In other words, history is created by spending time with someone, and all of a sudden you realize these passing feelings are no longer passing because now they've been turned into emotions. And you don't really know what to do with the emotions. Fear begins, conflict begins, all sorts of just weird things that happen inside you. Eventually, what happens as these emotions just evolve and grow, and all of a sudden you realize that there is a tsunami that's living inside you. What happens is that you say, I want my body to go where this person is. Because you know that wherever you position your physical body, if you're in this class, I appeal to a certain set of emotions and certain set of reflections. That's what this class does. When you go to your math class, a different set of emotions take place. And as a result, you begin to think differently about things. When you go to work, now you have a different set of emotions. So as you mature and as you grow, as you come to realize what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy, you become very, very careful as to where you want to take your physical body. Because you know that wherever you place your body, emotions are going to be generated. And should you place your body in the wrong environment, you're going to expose yourself to a lot of negative emotions. Okay? So there comes a point where I say my body just needs to be next to Jan's, and most of my mental space has been occupied by the image of Jan's, and I realize all the emotions, i.e. soul that lives inside me, desires to be with Jan. Okay? For the first time now in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, what I do come to understand about myself is a human being such as me who walks around thinking about 1,001 things, for the first time in many, many, many decades, these three pieces have formed a trinity. They are one and the same. They all want the same thing. My body wants Jan, my emotions want Jan, and my soul or my mind wants Jan. Okay? And the same thing happens to this. As she spends more time with me, she also desires me. Okay? Now what happens is this thing, love, is created. And I suppose you can call this magic, and it's also a mystery. And everything about this is magical. Your sex is magical. Your conversation is magical. Holding hands is not just holding a piece of meat. It's something profoundly different. So this is how things used to be, according to Aristophanes some years ago. Now, one of the nice things about, I suppose, let's just make it quite cheesy, finding a soulmate, is that for the first time in many years, you find yourself complete. There is nowhere else to go, nothing else to look at. You don't desire anything. It's like you have attained or entered your Garden of Eden down here. Okay? Now, if I was to tell you something very, very, very personal some years ago, this is like, well, most of you weren't born then. I was going out with this young woman, and we found ourselves at a church. There was no one in the church. It was just her and I. I turn upwards and I see this Jesus Christ. He was on the cross bleeding. He looked miserable. So I looked at this young woman, and for some strange reason, I just felt I was being intoxicated by her presence. So I said, let's go to the corner. And she said, yes, let's go to the corner. It was dark. It was this hiding place. I began to undress her. She began to undress me. And we fulfilled God's commandments. Jesus was pleased. And all of a sudden what you realize is that even if you walk into a church when you're in love and you undress someone and you have sex with them or you make love with them, there is nothing sacrilege about that. There is nothing blasphemous about that. Okay. And so all the moral norms, right, wrong, good, bad, go out the window. Um, and so for the first time again in many years, you kind of experience perfection and you become the embodiment of, I suppose, beauty. Now, one of the awful things about coming together with another human being and forming this perfect unit is that you look to your right and there is your companion and you worship her. And she looks at you and she worships you. There is no reason to read the Bible. Sin goes away, right, wrong go away. It's like you are in the Garden of Eden. There is nothing that you can do that's wrong. And you kind of stay in bed for like the next week or two and you just order pizza from Zachary's, a round table, you know, deep dish, spinach, mushroom with some pesto, you know. Now, Zeus, of course, didn't know what he was doing upon creating this particular creature. All of us in this classroom desire someone to worship us. You know, I don't like Snoop Dogg to look at me and say, Amir, you're great. That would be blasphemous. If on the other hand, I would run into Plato and Plato would say, Amir, I really, really like you, that would make my day for a week or two or three. And so Zeus, and I suppose all the gods out there to the present time, they create for one reason, for us to worship them. But the moment you fall in love, you have no need to worship anyone except your companion. So Zeus coming to realize that Adam looks at Eve and worships her, and Eve looks at Adam and worships him, he comes to realize that, well, I've created this tiny little animal who doesn't need anything, doesn't even need the gods. You know, all of his or her needs can be satisfied by just looking to the person next to them. So he decides to do something really fascinating. He says, you know, I'm going to cut this particular animal in half. I'm going to make one masculine, the other feminine, so that Adam can be Adam, Eve can be Eve. That when you walk into Caesar's realm, you just do what the Caesar wants. And when you go into God's realm, you do what God wants. Lion and lamb can never lay together. And Zeus argued as long as two different parts remain far apart, they will always be hungry, they will always be unhappy, they will always be dissatisfied. But the moment they find one another, they will have no reason to worship anything, belong to anything. They have formed their own cult or community. They have attained perfection. So for those of you who sometimes wake up in a bad mood, or some of us in this class who once in a while, despite having many things in our lives, you find yourself to be somewhat unhappy, maybe even ungrateful, it is because of what was done to us some years ago by Zeus. Cuts us in half, so we are forever walking around incomplete, imperfect, looking for our other half. So I suppose one of the reasons why most of us in this class pursue relationships is simply because of that. There is something about us that yearns to be in companionship with someone, but it just can't be two meats grinding against one another. It has to be filled with passion, i.e. love. So let's talk about why relationships go bad, as they should. Any questions before? Allahu Akbar, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah.
Heard of the three-body problem?
No, I don't think so. No. Maybe on Tuesday?
Maybe this ties in, but general thoughts on music.
Yeah, I can't do that right now. Probably in some shape or form. So, before we talk about relationships, let me just do what I always do, which is cut the human being in various parts. Iron, bronze, silver, gold, and what they call transcendence, and eventually what they call unity. You have people belonging either to this category, this, or this, or this, or this. And as you go higher, it becomes a bit more complex. Your circle shrinks. You can only maybe find one here of 8 billion people on this planet. The majority of people are here for good reasons. Now, iron refers to the genitalia. It's a place of passion. It's a place of immediate desires. It's our kind of like what Freud had argued about our id center. We just want things. And we want them for good reasons, because life has a tendency of robbing us of pleasure. And so we seek things that will give us pleasure. And none of us in this class have the patience to make a lot of sacrifice to find pleasures that are actually good for us. So we always pursue things that are easy to get. One of, at least in the 21st century, if you want to know what the pleasures in the iron stage looks like, pornography, sex, drinking, smoking, just, stupid, ridiculous lifestyles that are very easy and cheap to get. Now, given that some of you in this class have some age on you, that you're no longer 18, you just didn't graduate from high school, you made some mistakes, you left, dropped out of high school, you pursued your passions in life, and you came to realize that, well, you're not really moving forward at all. So what you've done is you said, you know what, I'm going to pursue a different kind of pleasure. And you move into the bronze area. Bronze really, for the most part, have to do with the abdomen. It's a place of power. Okay, now remember, whenever you want to pursue anything in life, you need resources. If you want to come to my office, the resource you want is the courage. Not money, not coffee, not even questions initially. You need to get over your nervousness. You need to come to the office and knock on the door. That's your resource. If you don't have that, what you'll only have is a desire to come to the office, but you'll never will. So remember, to obtain anything in life, you need power. Okay? So when it comes to the abdomen area, some of you in this class who are over the age of 18 or 19 or 20, you say, I've wasted enough of my life. I want to make my life something more than immediate gratification. So you sign up for classes. Okay? And the moment you sign up for classes, you're mostly, for the most part, future-oriented. It's no longer having sex and having an orgasm 10 minutes later. It's no longer drinking and having fun a few hours later. It's no longer smoking and walking with Jesus Christ on clouds and then dropping down. Okay? This means you have to now make more sacrifices. If here, your pleasure is going to be given to you in 10 minutes, here you have to wait for 2 years to graduate from Laney. So as you move up, your sacrifices become a bit more complex. You become a bit more complex. Your desires become a bit more complex. Okay? Here, you can see the outcome, feel the outcome of what it means to get high, what it means to drink, what it means to hang out with losers. They are immediate. You only need to wait 10 minutes. Here, you have no idea what's going to happen if you graduate. If you're going to get a job, if you're going to get a job you like, if you're going to take classes you enjoy, if you'll have instructors who are crummy or not. So here, you walk into the unknown. Okay. These two areas, for the most part, are profoundly selfish. It's about you, it's about your life, it's about your fun. Bodhi, hello. Then comes the chest area, which we call silver. For the first time, something happens to you, which is you've had enough immediate pleasures that you now are aware that they won't really take you very far. Here, you have your diploma, you have a job, you have money, you have your own one-bedroom apartment in which you live. But something very strange happens to you, and for the first time you say, I really want to share my life with someone. You're not 18, you're not 20, you're not 25, you're not 30, you're not 40. Your life, for the most part, when it comes to pleasures of the body and the power that you get from education, from getting a job, from having money, you have those now. Now you want to share them. And silver is a place where you want to actually share your life with another human being. This is a place of relationships. And maybe you want to go back in time and mend your relationship with your father, with your mother, with your friends. It doesn't really matter. But this is about serious relationships where you're truly invested. Okay? Now, these three areas have to do with your physical life. And it is important. I don't care if you are interested in this class and you want to go get your master's in hopes of being in the classroom and talking about philosophy, religious studies, or humanities, and inspire yourself and inspire people. It may be that you may walk in the classroom and realize you're just awful. Regardless of how bad or good you may be, the money you get from this job will nourish the sort of pleasures that are needed in your life. You will have children. Children need immediate gratification. You need money to pay rent, to make sure that your wife, your kid, your companion are happy, that you can help your parents. If you're missing these two components, there's a good chance that even if you're very serious about your relationship, because you have never been able to overcome immediate gratification, and relationships are tough, there's a good chance that because you didn't graduate from this area well, and you didn't graduate from this area well, this is not going to last. Relationships require money and power. Without them, you will lose. Okay? Now, when you start going to school, you will learn how to be patient. It will socialize you in a completely different way. It's very much like me telling you to do an assignment, even though you don't like it. Your companion will tell you wash dishes, even though you don't like it. Okay. Now, there comes a point, I suppose, where what we talked about with Lilac the other day about death. And it doesn't really have to be your body kind of just failing you. You kind of look yourself one day in the mirror, you look at your life, and it's like emotionally you become dead to your life. Nothing about your life interests you. Okay? You look at your kids and you say to yourself, well, they're grown now. I don't really care for them that much. They have a bit more autonomy, a bit more power. They can manage their own lives. You look at your own companion and you say, well, there was a time where him and I or her and I used to get along and kind of meet eye to eye, but now that stage is gone. Even though I enormously like her, I can't see my own reflection in her. Okay? And all of a sudden what happens is you have a house, but it's not a home. You have a marriage, but it's not really a relationship. You have children, but you're not really a father. You have a job, but it's no longer an extension of who and what you are. And when you get to this place where you examine, like the salmon fish, the sort of life you have led for the past 30, 40, 50 years, all of a sudden you realize you want to divorce your life. It doesn't mean you want to physically walk out, but it does suggest that emotionally you just can't find your own reflection in any of the things that you've accumulated for the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And this is devastating. Because what we do here is we create stories. Okay? And these stories give us relevance, meaning, identity, and a sense of belonging. There is a story that was told to us, I'm not quite sure by who. It was about this man who ends up in some sort of a prison. His cellmate is a young man. And this old man looks at this young man and says, wow, I've been sitting back and listening to your stories for the past few weeks. It seems that despite you only being 40 and me being like 90, you've had such a rich life. Why don't we do a swap? Every morning, you give me one of your stories for $1,000. You sell me a story, I'll give you $1,000. And then you can give that money to your friends, to your parents, to your siblings, since they don't really have very much money. And the young man says, let me think about this for a while. He says, there's only one catch, the old man tells him, that once you sell me a story from your life, it'll be deleted or erased from your memory bank. Okay, no big deal. So every morning, this young man looks at this old man and sells him a story and gets $1,000. 2, 3, 4, 5 years pass by, and one morning he gets up to again tell a story, only to realize there are no stories left. His memory is blank. He is nobody. So he hangs himself. The only reason why most of us in this class continue with life is because of the narratives we create for ourselves. Even if you happen to be with an alcoholic, the only reason why you continue with the relationship is the narrative of hope. Even though as a young woman you know that the guy you're with is no good for you and can't be good for you because he is young, hope is the driving force. Without those narratives, we won't survive. So when it comes to the iron and bronze and silver, once you're done with the pleasures of the genitalia, the pleasures given to you by the abdomen, the pleasures of emotional relationships, once you realize they can no longer fulfill or satisfy certain parts of you, little by little you will divorce. Now, for most of us, of course, in this class, we're not going to do that. We will do whatever we possibly can to hang on to what little we have. Okay? There's going to be a good amount of conflict in this day and age. I suppose you'll seek therapy, you'll seek some sort of medication. That's just the way things seem to be going these days. At a certain point, someone who becomes discontent with all of this, kind of like Plato, who wanted to be a lawyer, who wanted to be a politician, who wanted to be a playwright, comes to say, you know what? I have encountered this man named Socrates. He doesn't want my body. He doesn't want my money. The only thing he wants is my mind. But he doesn't really want my mind unless it's empty. There is something about him. There is something that he has on the inside, and I don't really know what it is. What he has on the inside is called eudaimonia, the demon of happiness. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't smell it. But there is something about our organism that senses when someone has something. You want to call it magnetism, you can. You want to call it charisma, you can. You want to call it spirit. It doesn't really matter what name you want to give it. Okay? So what happens is you gravitate towards this thing called gold. I suppose if you are familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave, it's the sun that he sees. Or for those of you in this class who are addicted to anything, alcohol, drugs, video games, the sun, I suppose, would be you walking away from this particular addiction. Lots of suffering, lots of sacrifice, lots of conflict. Okay? You walk away, you go back. You walk away, you go back. You go through this yo-yo syndrome for many, many, many years until one day you realize your sacrifices are paying off. You're able to stay away from the bottle or the video games for like 5 or 6 or 7 hours, if not days or months. Okay. Now, without making it too complex, Jason, let me say the following now in regards to relationships. We'll save these two for later. Do you have any questions so far? Yeah.
Where are you?
Where am I? Certainly not here. Okay. So all these different individuals have a certain amount of richness to them. They have on their shelf certain things they can offer and no more. Right? So you can in fact fall in love at the iron stage. And one of the interesting things about us is that you look at someone and feelings are just going to be generated. And we are guided by those particular feelings. We move towards the object of attraction. And when you spend time with someone, they just grow they grow on you. And so what happens is there comes a point where, very much like the diagram we had here, you realize even though you're like 12 and there is nothing interesting about your life, you in fact do have the ability and the power to fall in love, and you do. And you do write poetry. You do sit by the phone for many, many hours. And you feel as if without the presence of this other person, you have no soul inside you. Like they have your heart. They've taken it out. And the only person who's able to give that heart back to you is that particular person. The only problem with the iron stage of falling in love is that the physical intimacy, in as much as it is intense, it is beautiful, there comes a point where after 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, there is something about us that desires substance, meaning, depth. And when you're 18 and when you're down here, you can't offer those things to anyone. Okay? And relationships have inside them a world of politics. You have to be mindful of your own emotions, mindful of the other person's emotions. Okay? So pleasure down here is really just defined in a very, very superficial way, but it can sustain a relationship for some time. And then it just goes bad. Now, one of the things you need to understand about, before we get to these areas, let me say a couple of things about how this is me again, okay? And I have 5 senses: eyes, ears, nose, touch, and taste. These 5 windows connect me to the physical world, okay? Without them, I would be nothing, okay? These create memories for me. What these things, these 5 windows will do for me is they generate experiences, okay? Some experiences are positive. They just call them happy. Some experiences are negative. Let's call them pain. And some experiences are neutral. Whether they're there or not, it doesn't really matter. You will never gravitate towards pain unless you have found that in pain, you can be creative. In pain, you can find inspiration. In pain, you can be a poet. But that's for very, very advanced people. Okay? For most of us, we just pursue things that give us pleasure. And then the sort of animals that we are, we want this pleasure to be repeated. For those of you in this class who have ever experienced physical intimacy, and I'm going to refrain from using the S word, okay? But that's what I mean, is that you try to be engaged in that particular human activity as long as you possibly can. Why? Because as long as you can be physically engaged, the pleasure will continue. The moment you are satisfied, the pleasure ends. And if the relationship has a good amount of superficial components in it, once you have climaxed, there's a great amount of feelings of shame and guilt and disgust. Okay? So there is something out there, and I don't know what it is. Let's just say it's a woman, okay? And I'm here, and I look at her, and there is a sense of attraction. How, why, when, who, I don't really know. All I know is that some people have certain things about them. I look at them, and I say, man, that's exciting. Okay? عشق اصطلاب و اسرار خداست. If you want to know how attraction comes about, it's one of those mysterious things of God. We don't know, only God knows. Okay. Now, we talked about this the other day, but at this stage you have elements of curiosity and interest. Now, if the attraction stays with you for a while, okay? Now, this is passive. It's the siblings of attraction. It generates on its own. You don't need to do anything. Okay. All you know is that there is something about you that says, interesting. If the curiosity and interest remain, these two elements, if they stay with you, now you become actively curious and actively interested. Which means that you will come to my office, you will knock on the door. It's no longer passive. And the moment you become actively interested, it means that you've given it some thought. About the class, about me, about you, about your life, about your future, okay? Now, it doesn't mean that just because now it's been actively initiated that you're going to stick with it. This is like anything else in life. There are lots of vultures out there, lots of things to be interested and attracted to, and they could at any time come by and snatch that interest. So remember, a human being is nothing but a container. And the physical world, whatever it is out there, they're trying to generate desires, interest, and pursuits. Okay? Now, once you get to a place of active curiosity and interest, there comes a point where all of a sudden you say, I desire to know. For the first time, you have this desire inside you. Attraction is not desire. Curiosity is not desire, unless you want to just say, semantically speaking, that it is some kind of a desire. That may be so, but now you actually just focus on that thing for a little bit, all right? Now, whenever you have a desire, it could be passing. In other words, it could stay with you for 10 minutes, it can stay with you for 10 hours, or 10 months, or 10 years. Right. Now, the moment you have a desire, you have a certain amount of poverty inside you. I want you. Okay? I'm attracted to you, Jason, let's just say. I'm curious as to why you keep showing up to this class. I'm interested to know. I'm not looking for an answer. Okay. Now, from this point on, the question is, am I willing to spend time to see why I'm curious about you and why I'm interested in you? Okay? Now, this poverty can only grow because I show more interest, or it can diminish because I just lose interest in you. Okay. So whenever you desire something, you're in a place of you don't have. Okay? And what you want is you want to have. Okay? Now, to get what you don't have, you need resources. If you're down here, if you want to get high, you need money. Or you need loser friends. Okay? If you want to get done with school, these people down here are not going to be good resources. If you want to graduate from Laney, you can't hang out with losers, people on the iron, because they're always going to kind of tell you, drop out of school. That class is no good. What are you doing? Let's just go have fun. If you're up here, you want to have a solid relationship, don't go out with people who are just about making money and fulfilling their own desires. Okay? So remember, every group has its own community of people that can either support you or derail you. Okay? So, as you and I spend more time, and right now, let's just say 20% of your interior is occupied by this class and me, 80 other percent is just the rest of the stuff that you do in life. As you and I spend more time together, what happens is now 50% of me is occupied inside you. Okay. So there is infatuation, there is obsession, and then there is love. Okay? When you get to this place, I am inside you all the way. Metaphorically speaking, even though you want to focus on other things, it's going to be somewhat difficult. Okay? Now, there are 3 stages that you go through. Now, the first thing that you need to understand about love is that first, it's emotional. Okay? It starts as a tiny little seed of a feeling. When the feelings are repeated, it turns into an emotion. Emotions always have history inside them. You don't go to a therapy because your father just looked at you and said, "You're stupid." You go to therapy because for the past 50 years, he's looked at you and said, "You're stupid." Now you have an emotional crisis. Okay? The only reason why you end up in this place called love is because this tiny little seed has exploded into this emotion. Okay? So remember, all love relationships, whether you are falling in love with Snoop Dogg or Jesus Christ, it is initially a feeling, then emotions. Now, one of the things about emotions is that they ultimately want to be housed in a physical container. It's no longer enough for me to look at you, Jason. From emotions, I need to get close to your physical body. It's the only vehicle where I can see my own emotions in language. If you read the Gospel of John, okay, what you have is the Spirit of God, and then you have the flesh called Jesus Christ. All right? Now, once I have you physically, right now, and I'm interested, and you know that you're mine, and you know that I'm yours, and there is this thing called love, my journey in you begins. Journey in you. I want to figure out who you are, what you are. Now, this is going to be paused for a little bit because for the first time, I am now physically close to you. I explore who you are and who I am through our physical intimacy. And there is nothing wrong with it. There comes a point where I am saturated by the physical intimacy. I still would like to be in the bedroom with you, washing our clothes, right? But at a certain point, I say, you know what, this is fun. Why don't we go out, have dinner? And while you're having dinner, from the feelings to the body, now I tap into your intellect. I want to know your history a little bit, who you are, what your passions are. And the intellectual part is going to be really, 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 really tough. If I am down here and you are up here, there is nothing we have in common. But for you to understand this, it's going to take you about 2 years. Which means that 2 years of your life will be wasted on me. Okay? Now, remember, desires can only last as long as you have interest. The moment the interest goes away, and all interests will go away. Okay? If, on the other hand, you're in love with someone like a Jesus Christ or a Socrates, that's like a swimming pool or an ocean that's like 500 feet deep. Okay? The only reason why you may walk away from a Socrates is because you're just emotionally exhausted by diving every day. You know? So remember, so initially is journey towards, then journey in. Okay? There comes a point where emotionally, I know how it feels to love you. Physically, I know how it feels to love you. Intellectually, if you ever get there. Okay? To some extent, I know your history. I like some of it. You like some of mine. There comes a point where my desire has been satisfied. There is really nothing more I want to know about you. Instead of like being in the bedroom like every day, it's now every other day. It's maybe once a week, maybe once a month. And in long-term relationships, maybe just never, right? And when I come home, I don't really care about how you're feeling today. I want to know if there is food on the table. And I don't really care about your interpretation of Adam and Eve. I would just want to be left alone. And now enters the politics of relationships. Okay. As most of you know, I had a teacher for about 10, 12 years of my life, and then he became a family friend. The story that he used to tell me when we used to go to gatherings once in a while is that he was, I think, 27, 28, and his wife was maybe 20. And so they had a chance to meet and speak to each other for maybe a couple of hours. And the first thing he said to her was, listen, I love philosophy and I love history of religious traditions. My life is going to be devoted to understanding philosophy, religion. I want to write, I want to think, I want to travel and figure out the meaning of life. That's who I am, that's what I am. If you like those things, I'll marry you. If you don't like those things, I don't want to waste my time. And she said, yeah, I love those things as well. And they had a very, very rich life before his passing, you know. And so the point I'm trying to make is sometimes what happens is you're actually unclear as to what it is that you want. Okay? You're down here, but you meet someone that's up here. And if they have enough power inside them, and if there is something very attractive about them that you see and experience, they have the power to push you to go here and then here quickly. Okay. Now, if there is depth in your pursuits in life, there's a good chance that your desires, instead of being satisfied after a year or two or three, they'll be satisfied in 20 years. Now, the other thing you need to understand about people is that if you are in a relationship and it's not a marriage, there's a good chance it's not going to work out too well. If you're in a relationship that is a married one, there's a good chance that you may want to leave, but because to some extent there's a part of us that's still very old school, the elements of religion, shame, guilt, various components that live in society will keep you from walking away until you hit a breaking point and then you walk away from the marriage. If you have children, there's a good chance that most of your conversations are going to revolve around the well-being of your kids. And that's the thing that glues you. Okay. But when it comes to like 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds being in love, when their life is just all over the place, it's just poison that you're injecting into your life. It won't last. But that's true of anything that you desire. Desires eventually have a tendency of being satisfied. And the moment they are satisfied, you realize you're no longer interested. And so you have to move on to a different desire. Okay. Now you can either, sometimes there is nothing wrong with your relationship. You just have to grab your companion and both of you have to change the things you desire in life. Every time my wife and I get into an argument because we're just bored, we just go to Home Depot, buy 5 gallons of paint and begin to paint things. We don't even need it, but that's the way we survive. So. Have you,
If they sort of generally have this understanding, right, that we're driven each individually by our desires. We want a good life, a rich life, understanding of the world. And we, like, why is it poison? Do we not constantly change and together grow to something that's positive and
In theory, it sounds really good. As a bumper sticker, as a Dr. Phil and Oprah Winfrey, they all sound good. But the reality of today's world is that the divorce rate is almost 70%. And I don't think people get married to divorce. And I don't think people have kids to walk away from the kids. You know, there are lots of things to consider, I think. You have to consider how technology has rewired all of us. The fact that this particular environment is really, I mean, life is really, really fast. You move from one thing to another. And so the idea is that whenever there is some sort of an issue that takes place in any relationship, the remedy should be quick when in fact it's not. Add to it the fact that as you get older, you become a bit more complex. You have more stuff inside you. And as you get into a relationship, these stuff once in a while come out. And we don't really know what those things are. I don't like to examine it. I don't like to see them. I don't like to be around them. But in relationships, they just come up. And now you got two issues. You got issues of your own, and then you have the problem that the other person has with you. And in as much as we all want to say that let's, grow together and mature together, no. If you want a healthy relationship, leave the other person alone. But for that, you need a good amount of autonomy and creativity. That your life needs to be rich, And when I look at some of the tennis players, what I realize about them is that, and I mostly watch men because women just bore me to death. Their wives, they were all tennis players. And they all come to watch them. You need to have some core compatibilities. And you can't know what you're good at the age of 18. I mean, if you're a genius and you just love piano, that's a different story. For someone like me, who's just confused about almost everything under the sun, if someone comes to me and says, I love you, I don't want to ask, well, why exactly do you like me? I don't even like myself. Yeah.
You spend most of your time at a tennis court. Are you most likely to find your partner playing tennis?
Yeah.
And then, how is pain seeking not a kind of roundabout way of pleasure seeking or distraction?
Now, as I said, sometimes the sort of pain that they experience creates trauma. I'll give you an example. It's something I was sharing with my students yesterday. I know many of you in this class know Gene Hackman, at least heard of him, the actor. He was being interviewed, I think it's called like Actor Studio. I forget the name of the interviewer. And he comes to a point where he looks at Gene and says, well, this is this point where I begin to ask you some questions about your parents. Your father left you. And this is like a 70-year-old man at this point in his life. And then he chokes up. He says, yeah, when I was 13, my father was driving this car, waved goodbye. And for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, you could just see him not being able to talk about the stuff well. But one of the things he said after he kind of just recovered and put himself back together was that one of the nice things about having traumatic experiences as an actor is that you can tap into those emotions. I'm not an actor. All I know is that when an event walks into my life and makes a mess of my life, I don't look at it and say, oh, wow, I'm going to use that as a creative source. It doesn't work for me that way. My intellect comes in and says, this event is causing me a lot of anguish, psychological pain, physical pain. What then am I going to do with it? And if I can't remedy it, I'm going to get depressed. And in depression, you're alone. In depression, language falls away. In depression, you lose faith, you lose trust. No one can come close to you. You don't want anyone around you. and then it becomes chronic. Most of us, and this is, America is a confessional environment. In other words, everybody's out there using another human being and their ears as a confessional booth. Let me tell you what happened to me. Okay? This is what this culture is all about, which means that pain, okay, is not easily remedied here. Okay? In perhaps cultures where there are wars, there is a good amount of poverty, where kids are not spoiled the way kids are here today, where even poor homeless people don't have the privilege of only just being a vegetarian. It's like sometimes you feel bad for someone, you buy them some food and they say, oh, this has meat, I'm sorry, I'm a vegetarian. You're homeless, what do you mean you're vegetarian? Just eat the food. Okay? You realize that in poverty-stricken environments, people just have thick skins. There was this thing that took place around 1978 with Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. It was a fight that took place in Zaire. And most of the commentators had argued that George Foreman, being the beast that he was going to just demolish Ali. And he did for the first 7 rounds. And then came the 8th round, where George Foreman was completely exhausted and Muhammad Ali just beat the crap out of him and he won the match. And I remember a lot of people were cheering Muhammad Ali because he just was a very unique human being, Muhammad Ali was. And so he was walking around town and he looked at the physical environment where people lived and boxes and, just an awful, awful environment. But he looks at them and says, despite the immense poverty that you guys are born in and live with, there is so much dignity about you guys. You guys have so much self-respect despite being so poor. How is it that here in America, we also have poverty, but there is no dignity? There is anger, there is rage, there is violence, there is thievery, but no self-respect. And so what you have is a good amount of cultural influences. The culture kind of tells you, if you're in pain, keep your mouth shut. No one likes to hear you. Here, the story is very different. Even at the age of 2, just walk into any Safeway. A kid is crying. The mother says, honey, tell me how you're feeling. Why are you feeling this way? And the idea is until the time you die, there is someone that always needs to be there to figure out why you feel the way you do. Anna.
I guess this is somewhat related, but I heard some one of Aristotle's ideas that philosophy is only for the wealthy, and I guess what that made me think do you think that philosophy is somewhat of a privilege, having some level of comfort to be able to spend so much time in deep thought?
If you want to walk 5 miles, you should have healthy legs, healthy back. So one could say that walking is only for the physically able people. Okay. If you want to spend a good amount of time writing a good essay, 5 hours, you could say writing good essays is a privilege that only people who can focus for 5 hours can write. If your life is busy with 1,001 different nonsensical things, the truth is, you can't really focus on the essay. Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist. He was born in New York. He was a very, very interesting man. And then I think the 1950s and 60s were just interesting times. It just made people rough and tough. And despite being one of the perhaps best psychologists that America has ever produced, he was really never able to get over the fact that his mom was an awful human being. So much so that he didn't even go to her funeral. Okay? So sometimes you can have great ideas, but you can't really apply those ideas. You know, turning the other cheek, as Jesus would say, for example, when you kind of put people in a very practical, physical environment where they're forced to apply what they preach, you realize they fail. Okay? He had this idea, it's called hierarchy of needs, that instead of talking about Maslow, let me just give it to you in this way. I don't want you to come to my office talking about your grade. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in getting to know whether you're a boy or a girl or this or that. I'm not interested. I don't care if you like your father or not. I don't care about your friends. I don't care about your Facebook page. None of those things interest me. I want to know if I can train you how to think well. But I can't even do that just yet. You have to like me enough to come to my office all the time. But for that to happen, it means that other areas of your life that you find interesting, they have to fall from you. If every time you come to my office, you want to talk about things I'm not interested in, you will bore me. I will lose interest. I will walk towards you only for so long. Then I will pull back. And so philosophy is very much the same way. In other words, it requires you to think well about things, which means what? It means that emotionally, you have to detach yourself from the thing that you're seeing. I don't care about your biases. Nobody cares. The only person who cares is you. You need to sit back and look at something, and that requires a great amount of detachment, sobriety. And if there is something that you really, I mean, I don't know if you have ever liked someone, and you realize as you're sitting and talking to this person, they keep looking around and winking at that person and winking at that person. You say, man, you know, I'm right here. And they keep looking at other people, right? And then you say, well, maybe they're not interested in me after all. So the first thing you need in philosophy or any craft that you want to be good at is the element of love. Now, the fruit of philosophy's love is wisdom. But if wisdom gets interrupted by you wanting money, by you wanting wealth, by you wanting social status, by you talking about your dad, your mom, this and that, well, wisdom never is going to be given a chance to walk into your life because it's always going to be disrupted. That's hierarchy of needs. If you want your philosophical life to remain uninterrupted, if you want to be devoted, you can't be tempted by health issues, financial issues, okay, parental issues, housing issues, emotional issues, and job issues. You have to kind of have all those things checked. And then you say, you know what? I'm in good health. I have food. I have shelter. I have clothing. I have a great job. I don't have to worry about money. I don't have to worry about rent. I love my parents. So relationship issues are not there. And one of the things about parents and kind of having a good time relationship with them is there needs to come a point where you need to trust me. And if the people closest to you at some point in your life, if that trust has been broken, the trust that I need you to have in me is never going to happen. Why? Well, you couldn't trust your dad, you couldn't trust your mom, you couldn't trust your friends, you can't even trust yourself. How the hell are you going to trust me? So every time you come to my office, you're going to be bombarded with 20,000 doubts. I ain't got time for that. If you look at Moses, he's a prince. The Buddha is a prince. Muhammad, wealthy. Jesus, wealthy. Mahavira, wealthy. Old Malcolm X, wealthy. Martin Luther King, wealthy. You can't find anyone who's come up with any great ideas who were like physically poor and always bothered by their poverty. You know, you have someone like Diogenes is one of the founders of the Cynic schools in the Greek period, ancient. And he came to realize that most of us are just fools and idiots. So he lived in a bathtub. And one day Alexander the Great goes to visit him. And Alexander looks at him and says, I've heard from people that you're the great Diogenes. I would like to learn a few things from you. And Diogenes looks at Alexander the Great, who is like, the king of the world, says, you're blocking the sun. Can you just remove yourself? And just go away. I don't like to see you. Walk away. And Alexander the Great goes home and says very much the same thing that Confucius says upon meeting Lao Tzu, that some people just have wings and they like to fly. And he never pursued money. He never pursued a wife or a husband or kids. He never pursued buying a house or none of those things. He just wanted to be free. But, given the nature of this culture, I think you should major in philosophy, but have a double major, one in computer science. Just in case philosophy can make you money, you can tap into the computer science field. Make money from 9 to 5 and go home and read books about philosophy. You'll have the best of both worlds. But we'll talk about Maslow and his hierarchy. Excellent. Any other questions or comments before we go home? Okay, it's good to see you.